All right. Well, happy Tuesday, I think I would say, but it's actually Monday because due to the crazy time zones, we're recording this one ahead of time. So you're going to see all the energy, all the fun that you would if this was live, but I'll just be watching the comments and responding there. So I'll actually be able to be a little more interactive than the comments than I would. But anyway, that's not the point. The point is I'm joined by Raj Sundarason. Oh, geez, Louise, I even practiced this back. Sundarason, is that right?
We'll take it.
Oh, come on. How is it? You got to say it now. Sundarason. Okay, so I did remember it. Okay, anyway, the point is we're talking today and we're going to be talking about digital adoption tech, but from a different angle and hopefully unpack it a little bit more. Now, you may recognize my guest, Raj, we figured this out almost exactly 2 years ago. We had our last conversation. At the time, he was with WalkMe, and that was really on the show, the first introduction to digital adoption tech. And we got into some of the weeds of how it works and all this stuff. But today we're going to go a little bit further than that and take it back a level. And also we're going to talk a little bit about Raj, and he's on a new journey with where he's at, and he also wrote a book. So we got a lot to talk about. We're also going to see how some of the predictions we made 2 years ago turned out. So thanks so much, Raj, for joining me again, especially at this hour.
No, absolute pleasure to be here, and I'm delighted to be here, regardless of the time, because I remember when we did this 2 years ago, it was actually probably an hour later, and I just landed from kickoff from Arizona. So
it was you had just gotten back home from a kickoff in the States, and it was 2 hours later, I think. It was something like that. So it was you were a bit in a fog. I remember that. You were a bit in a fog. A little more rested today. Okay, so for the fun of that, though, let's still do our icebreakers like we normally would. But so you are home, but where is that in the world right now?
I'm in Singapore, which is a little red dot in Southeast Asia.
All right. And what time is it there right now again?
It's just before 11 p.m. at night.
Okay, just before 11 p.m. here. It's
on
just
Monday
before
night.
9.
Monday
all right.
night.
Yeah, because I came in and I said, "Hey, happy Monday." He's like, "Well, not for much longer." So where mine's just firing up. The joys of tech. All right, so I'm in Wisconsin, where I always am. Now, the other icebreaker question, you when I asked if you had the answer to this, you were just like out of the gate, yes, I know the answer. So I'm curious to see where you go with this. But what was the first concert you ever attended?
Simply Red.
Simply Red. Okay. Well, I mean, give me some color behind it. They can't just be your answer. Simply Red.
No, Simply Red. So they they came to Singapore. They were touring. Mick Hucknall, had Holding Back the Years, had the Stars album, where you went to the concert, went all dark and all the stars went all over the place.
Okay.
And I remember being in the indoor stadium with all our friends. And it was quite funny. In Singapore, we're meant to be a bit more reserved. So, the ushers kept trying to tell people, sit down, you can't dance, you can't get up. And, we kind of just, forget it. We're all dancing. We're done.
Didn't go very well.
Very much. Nah. And off we went. So that I remember very, very vividly.
Okay. All right. So I had to think back because I was trying to think, from were there any, I guess, first concert could be taken broadly. So I went with first concert that I really remember, and it was one I chose to go to, which was Linkin Park. I went to Linkin Park live, and this was before they were big. So they weren't even the main stage. They were the opener. And then I went back and saw them at the main stage. But that to me is one I will never forget, seeing them live. They are probably one of my favorite bands. And so seeing them live, and then, I was up front. It was pretty cool. Pretty cool concert.
Oh, very good. Very good.
All right. Well, that has nothing to do with the topic, but now people know a little bit more about Raj, and that's always important. So let's shift gears to this a little bit, because you're now not at WalkMe anymore, correct? As of just a few weeks. Okay, correct. So Raj is on the prowl, figuring out what's next for him as he looks at this. And you wrote the book, The DAP Strategist, which has been out for how long now?
Well, we went live October 27th last year. Okay. So it's probably about 5 months, just 5 months now.
Okay, so even though you were at WalkMe, you really are the DAP strategist in this. And I actually am curious, what inspired? I'm always curious when people say, "Hey, I wrote a book." What made you decide? I think I want to write a book, and then I'm going to write a book about being a DAP strategist.
Interesting question, right? So I think the first part was, I'd done a lot of work with customers, and I just saw employees and different stakeholders just see the life kind of drain out of them over the last 2 years. And I said, there's got to be a better way. Work can't suck so much, right? And as I was peeling back the onion, what I was starting to see was, people were just struggling with work every day because of the complexity of work, the tools that they were using, the systems they were using. And it wasn't about the tools and the systems being archaic. I mean, some organizations are like that, but, and you just could see it. Then, I started seeing people saying, nah, I've had enough of this. And, I think you guys have seen a lot more of whether you call it the great resignation, the great attrition, the great realignment.
Whatever word you want to associate with the great something. Yes.
Something. And, I said, look, tech is really there, to impact humanity for positive reasons. And it wasn't. And so I guess, that was, one of the underlying drivers. The second was, I was speaking with my then boss, and he said, look, what do you want to do this year? What's going to stretch you? And I said, maybe write a book, right? And, it comes out of your mouth quite easily, but all of a sudden someone says, okay, that's your development.
Perfect. That's your stretch goal this year. Oh, I wasn't like, okay.
So when you put it all together, you're like, okay, so, I think I've got a point of view which is important. I can see firsthand the implications of what's happening in the workplace. And now, I'm forcing myself out of my comfort zone. So when you put it all together, right, that was kind of the three drivers behind, getting this book done.
Okay. Got it. Well, I love the story about, because some people it's like, oh, my whole life I've always dreamed of blah, blah, blah. There's like this whole thing. And others are like, you know what? I just realized that there was and again, like you said, I realized there was a real problem where tech wasn't doing what it should be doing, and it didn't have to be that way. And I think that's the important part, is it doesn't have to be that way. And so, it's about how do you reframe that? So on that topic, on that comment though, because some people, again, we mentioned this right before we went live, that, well, I would say in the 2 years, you were the first digital adoption platform on the show. So, and I think I've only had a couple, actually. No, maybe even only one or two more since. It was still very early stage in terms of awareness and adoption in the industry. In 2 years, I've maybe seen it grow a little bit. I think there's definitely more organizations using them, whether or not some leaders are as familiar with what they are. So I think it's important we don't go too far and just assume everybody knows, oh yeah, DAP. They keep throwing this word DAP around and digital adoption as though everyone knows it. How do you, when you're working with somebody who may be in that situation where they go, this tech is just killing us and, yada, yada, yada. And you go, I think this may be your problem. How do you describe to them what a DAP is and why it could really turn that around?
Yeah, and that's an interesting question. And I think, when I sit down with clients before we go too far, I try and ask them, what's the biggest, concern with all these tech deployments? And they say, well, it's simple. We've got to try and get people to use it. So straight away, they're already aware, around, okay. Hey,
there is some consciousness that it's like, well, we got to make sure they use it.
And so then you start peeling back the onion and you say, okay, so really you're talking about people for them to adopt. And they're like, yes. And then,
I guess that's the word. Okay.
and then the next question is, how would you define to adopt? Right. And that's when sort of like you see the eyes sort of like glaze and, and you sort of like, if you had 10 people in a room, you get 10 different definitions. And, and so I said, and so we, I'm not a complex guy. So, we went to the dictionary and I said, look, why don't we go and have a look and see what it actually meant? And to adopt actually means to use something, right?
Okay.
Now, I didn't like that definition. So I said, look, maybe we can extend it a little bit to mean to use something in a consistent manner. Because if we didn't get it in a consistent manner, we'd have a problem. And everyone's like, yeah, that kind of sounds about right. And I said, okay, now let's flesh it out a little bit and understand what digital adoption means, right? And so, in very simplistic terms, it's about being able to use technology in a consistent manner. Now, once that light bulb went on, they were like, okay, now all of a sudden, the mindset's a bit more open because they get it, right?
Okay.
And now it's about trying to lay down what a digital adoption platform actually is, because it's like having 6 blind people in a room and putting in an elephant, right? And all of them sort of like reaching and having a different definition. Okay. And probably the time that I was on the call with you, the definition may have been something like the user's ability to seamlessly engage with the technology to execute on a business process, right?
Yep.
Now, fast forward 2 years, because the technology has evolved so much, it's no longer the user's ability, but now it's actually the technology's ability to seamlessly engage with the user to help them execute on the process, because the technology's evolved so much that you can configure it in such a way to trigger engagement events, right? To say, hey, listen, you need to do this and do that and do the other. And typically, right, that's done with a blend of, in-application guidance, similar to a GPS, automation, right, and an engagement. So you put it all together, that's the guts of it. But I think the one big difference over, in the 2 years is actually the analytical experience underneath. So I think there's been huge steps up around the insights layer around it. So now, you've got far more data points around what you can do, where you need to do it, and the different personas that need it.
Okay. So I actually want to ask a follow-up question on the insights piece, because I'm curious, how you're seeing this, because I think, one thing that I'm seeing with a lot of the tech right now is it's definitely capturing a lot of data. I mean, capturing more data than I think most people even know what to do with, which is a blessing and a curse if you don't have the insights piece figured out, because I've seen this with orgs where they have all these digital workplace technologies and they've got it feeding into a data lake, and there's just mounds of data, and it's rolling up to a plateau dashboard, and it's configured into all sorts of things, and people look at it and just go, wow, look at all those numbers. But they still aren't really sure what to do about it. It's just like, yep, lots of people in there, lots of things happening. Look at all this stuff. And it lacks that kind of, okay, but here's what you should do about it. Or here's a trend that we're seeing that you should actually take action on, because the machines are getting smarter at understanding this. But I'm not necessarily seeing that pick up at the same pace as, well, we're capturing more data points. So where are you seeing it advance?
So I think first thing is all customers are saying, hey, what level of analytics do you have? Which is quite amusing, right? Because most of them are ill-equipped to handle.
To even do anything with it.
Correct. So it's quite funny. The first question is, how much visibility, how many data points will I get? And I kind of look at them and say, well, do you have the ability? And I said, so I think the first thing is to realize that if digital adoption platforms are really going to deliver on the value that they have, the platform providers need to think about a managed service around insights, not analytics, insights. So they've got to basically take the data points and really, I'm not saying massage, but actually, curate options,
the most
and possibilities around that, right? I think that's the first part. I think the second is, again, shift away from data and analytics, but get to insights, but actionable insights. And what do I mean by this, right? You can have views of, how many people use the tech, how often they use it, how long they're in there, but does it really mean very much? No. But if I could break it down to say, hey, here is a process, right? For argument's sake, it's a 10-step process. And I now know it's going to take, 10 minutes to get across it, right? That's great. Now, what would make it even better is if I could tell you what the abandonment rate is within the process, number one. Number two, which part in the process people are abandoning, right? And how long it takes before they abandon. Because then you can kind of understand, right, severity and where you want to dive into, right? And then finally, if you can extrapolate that out, and this is nirvana, if you can then marry that same process across industries and have benchmarking data, and I don't like using the word benchmarks, but if, let's just take setting a goal, for example, right, in a HR system, right?
Yep.
If it takes retailer 1, 10 minutes, retailer 2, 30 minutes, retailer 3, 12 minutes, retailer 4, 7 minutes, I'm sure the retailer that's taking 20 minutes to do it would love to understand, right? Hey, how do I simplify and get it down to 7 to 10 minutes? Because in an aggregate form, right, if it takes that long, I'm leaving money on the table because I don't have people on the shop floor. That's where it becomes really, really powerful.
Okay.
And so I think we have the technology to capture it. I don't think we've thought out, right, the problem we're trying to solve and the implications, and this is a key theme in the book, the implications of not solving that problem.
Yeah.
And I think that's where we're at.
Well, and I think that it goes back to what you talked about early in the conversation when you are engaging with a client on, the possibility of a digital adoption platform. And you're asking that question like, well, what does it look like? Well, it's using it. Okay, so like adoption. It's the same thing with the data and analytics that I feel like is part of the problem is people aren't asking those follow-up questions when an organization says, well, what does your data and analytics look like? And you go, right. To what end? Like, what are you hoping to get out of that? Well, we just want to be able to see everything. And you can. And you can at this state. You can. We can see everything, but why? Because the reality is sometimes, and I've coached clients on this, where they've gotten so much data, they literally are in analysis paralysis because it's numbers, it's everything. And to your point, that can actually be overwhelming and actually prevent you from getting to the point of making actionable changes or, actually build a strong business case, because you end up just showing a dashboard that says, hey, we got this thing and look at all the stuff. And the exec team goes, okay, that's great. I'm glad it's getting used because, again, adoption, thank goodness it's being used. And that's certainly a level of value. But if it's not really telling me how is that better than what it was before, or how is that different, or what is that improving, you really are missing out.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And I think that's the shift that has to take place within organizations is actually, and I talk about this in the book again, what are the measurable operational and financial metrics that you can drive, those levers that you can drive from the insights of the platform, right? Because if you don't do it, then why the heck are you doing it? Because, the talk track around this has shifted quite dramatically. The old, what I would call, 2.0, DAP 2.0 was really about, I've got the ability to do guidance, engagement, automation, which was great because, now we've got the functional elements around it.
Yep.
But the real conversation that needs to take place now is, okay, hang on a second, right? How am I, how is my digital transformation or the investment I've made impacting revenue, risk, and or cost, right? And underneath each of those, what are the operational financial metrics that are being impacted? Because, that was the original business case to get, people's approval to go and spend the money on, on whether it's a new CRM or a new HR system or a new ERP transformation. Yeah. And then what happens is the moment they've got all the money and they start running off and they start implementing, right? The view of the world is go live, right? And then, okay, let's get through hypercare, right? Let's get through hypercare. And once we get through hypercare, right, let's pat everybody on the back because that's success.
High fives I can't tell you how many times I've seen that.
And my conversation with everybody is, I said, guys, it's not at post hypercare that success is. Success is when you can tie what you've delivered back to those financial and operational metrics. And you should see again the glazed looks that come. And I don't blame them because what typically happens, the moment you get sign off on that business case, right? Nobody ever looks back at why they did it.
No.
Right. And so where I think we're going to start seeing an evolution is where, someone's going to turn around and say, look, we spent $30 million on that program or $10 million on program or whatever it may be. And we set out to get $100 million in benefit. Right. Now, have we got the benefit?
Did we get that? Yeah. Right? How are we tracking on that?
Absolutely. And you just said the magic word. It's not about what did I buy? Why did I buy? It's how am I getting the value from the what and the why? Right. Okay. And that is why, to me, my personal view is that is why the vast majority of digital transformation programs fail to deliver on the promise, because we're not being as robust with each other on the how and tying it back to the operational financial metrics.
Yeah. I mean, I think, and this is where I think the complexity of it and where I think DAPs really do help tremendously, because I see it time and time again. And the thing is, when you talk about a major system implementation, and this is where it is, I get it's challenging. These are not 6-9 month transformations. I mean, this is not something where you go, well, we got it now, and we should see that return over the next 6 to 9 months. It's like, no, this is going to probably be a multi-year thing. And so you're fighting in many regards some uphill battles, because maybe the original sponsor who got on board and was behind it, they left. Maybe the organization got some new leaders. You've had attrition. You've had new people come on board who've got their own, well, I like this system instead of this system. And because of these things you're talking about, this is actually creating some of the organizational ADD, because you have people that, well, we aren't really tracking whether we're on the how. We're not really tracking how things are going. So I get this was the original business case, but I'm here now, so we're just going to kind of shift gears. And it's like, well, okay, but now you keep starting things over, and it never really has time to take off. And again, not having the how and not watching that is a huge risk to that, because you go, well, we're not really doing anything about it anyway. And now I'm here, so I've got a chance to kind of write my own business case and put my own stamp on it.
No, absolutely. And the question will then be, what is that business case, and how are you going to realize the value of that business case? It comes, and that's the discipline that needs to come back to it. Someone said to me, what happens with change and what happens if you stay the same? The bottom line is change is inevitable, not because of the human psyche. And, I introduced this character in the book. All right. It's not a super character, but almost quite, with superhero strength. And I call the character the baby user. And what I talk about is, regardless of whether it's a sophisticated system or not, when a company looks at all their users, right, they may see, users in different lights. Some are tall, some are short, some are a little bit plump, some a little bit skinny, some a bit, wiser, some a bit younger. But the bottom line is, when you introduce something new to somebody, all these users are actually baby users. We're all baby users. The question at the end of the day is, how do you get a baby user from crawling to walking to running when it comes to the use of technology? Because the sooner you can get them running, right, the sooner you start seeing the value realization from that investment, because people are using it. Now, the trick isn't just about how you get them to crawl, walk, run. The trick comes in. This is where a digital adoption platform comes in. The trick comes in when you throw a new functional release or a new change. How do you help that baby user hurdle that new change so that they aren't going from running back to crawling?
Right? You know, it's funny you bring this up because, and again, I think these are we're hitting at some of these core issues that get overlooked that organizations don't realize are actually completely curb stomping their progress as an organization. Because that piece, we talked about the one where, you know, sometimes teams, they get it to the finish line of, hey, it's been implemented and we're kind of past that early stage, pop the champagne, you know, shoot the confetti cannons and we all move on. But this other piece is another assumption that happens where they go, hey, okay, we kind of got to this phase where it's now kind of running. And so we don't need to do anything with it anymore because now they understand the system. And then we roll out a new functional release or we change a workflow in the system significantly. I just think of a good example in HR, performance management. We're changing our performance management Well, we don't really need that much training on it because it's in Workday. And you'll watch the whole workforce go from, hey, I'm running. This is great. I know what our thing is. I know what we're doing. Boom. Back to a baby user going like, I can't even, and we have a newish born. I mean, I can't do anything for myself type of a thing. And we just go, well, what the heck? What's going on? All we did was make this small change to our process. And you go, yeah. And because you don't have the support and enablement in place, you just knock the workforce back a decade in their ability to move, and you've slowed down the whole machine.
No, absolutely. I mean, in the book I talk about someone moved my button, right? And it's a true story. What happened to me? It must have happened to me probably 8 years ago, 6 years ago, somewhere like that. And I went in and I was going to do the performance reviews of my team, and I also had to do, I think it was 6 360s. Got into the room, switched everything on, locked myself up, and there's a button that you're supposed to click on, create performance form, right? And it used to be at the bottom right-hand side of the screen, right? And I was fixated. Where's the button? Where's the button? And it wasn't there. And for the life of me, I convinced myself the button was meant to be there and it was no longer there. And so I went from running, and you can imagine, right? Here I am in the room. Yeah. I've got all these reviews to do. I can't find the button. So what do? Right? I said, don't worry, I'll just call my HR business partner. So of course I called him, right? And he says, I'm out to lunch. What's the problem? I said, well, I'm trying to do all these reviews and I can't find the button, right? And he says, well, you do realize we had, back then it was a WebEx, right? We sent out the recording, we sent out the PowerPoint, we sent out everything. You didn't turn up to it. I can't really help you. So I've literally, I used to be running at the thing. And what was even more embarrassing was I sold this software for a living. And now all of a sudden I've gone from sprinting back to not even crawling. I'm just sat in the pen as this baby user saying, what do I do? Right. Yep. And, and some people say, oh, that's a cute story. But that story has, right. It has monetary value to it.
It does.
Right. That's the key, because what happened was, first of all, it's now stopped me. Then I basically put in a support call, right? Now, that support call is going to cost money to deal with. Now, admittedly, it's not cashable benefit, but it's productivity benefit and everything else, unless, of course, there's a cost recovery basis on the call. Now, if you extrapolate that out, I work for a, probably 120,000 employee company. Let's just say 10% of the organization had that, 10,000 people, 12,000 people, multiply that by $20 a call, right? Just on a button being moved.
Yep.
Right. You now all of a sudden can understand the implications around some of this stuff.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and the thing with this is this gets dismissed. I mean, again, I just don't know how to emphasize this enough to really make people realize this is big. This is big dollars and cents in an organization, is the fact that you don't, and what's funny about it is it's also one of the things nobody wants to talk about, because nobody wants to admit they're the baby user. So it's kind of taboo too, because it's kind of like, oh no. silly story, Raj, and it's like, yeah, actually that was me this afternoon when this happened. And I spent 45 minutes pounding my desk and putting in tickets because I couldn't figure out what was going on with this thing. And you're like, yeah, that was everybody. Everybody has been that person. Everybody is that person on a semi-regular basis. And the one that drives me bananas is when I'll hear things like, oh, the system is so seamlessly designed, it doesn't even require training. And you're like, okay. That's like saying, I have a baby that's so well, I've trained my baby so well, I don't need to feed and bathe or anything. They just figure it out on their own. And it's like, there's not a world where that happens. It's not possible to do it. Are there some people who might go to, crawl, walk, run faster than others and maybe a little bit more intuitively? Sure. Some will figure it out quicker than others, but they all have to go through that phase regardless of how seamless the UX is on the platform.
Yes, absolutely. And I think that, you come now to the next big agenda item in, why the book was written. And, if you look at the full title, it's called the DAP Strategy, but it's also underneath that got a subheading called, a new way of working to de-risk and accelerate your digital transformation. Now, why did I put that in there? I put that in there because, one of the big dirty secrets in the game is that the definition of digital transformation is also, up for grabs, because most people get confused between doing a digitization program versus what a real transformation program is all about. And I try and use the image of, of a caterpillar versus a butterfly. Right now, when you're finished through all of this, right? Are you still a caterpillar? You might be a fatter caterpillar with a few spots and everything else, but are you still that pesky insect that's eating leaves? Or have you truly changed, metamorphosized to being a butterfly that can fly majestically from plant to plant, cross-pollinating that plant because it's feeding on nectar? They started off the same thing, right? And that's the fundamental piece. And you can't expect end users who are a caterpillar to understand how to be a butterfly unless you have something there that's going to help them through that new way of working. So have you truly deployed new ways of working? And if you have, right, can you legitimately expect your baby users to go from crawling on a leaf to flying through the air majestically?
Yeah. Well, what's funny about you bringing this up is I had a conversation recently where we were talking about the fact that I was a little feisty about the fact that a lot of times when we hear people talk about transformation, they really are just looking at iterations of what they're already doing. It's just a step change. It's, well, we are radically transforming this. And you go, all right, okay, so what are you doing? Well, we used to do this and now we do it like this. And you're like, okay, that isn't a you're a caterpillar and you have a little less fuzz is kind of what happened. You're still eating leaves. You're still not doing anything different. You're still kind of a pesky garden nuisance. You didn't transform no, we're a butterfly. I swear, you're not. I'm telling you, you're not a butterfly type of a thing. And I think this is a big barrier to that metamorphosis I think there's a lot of factors. It's like we realize the pain that's in front of us. And so we're like, well, I don't really want to try and be a butterfly because I'm not sure we're going to come out the other end. And it's like, well, that's exactly why this is so important.
And I think you touch on a very important point. And it's, when I'm in a room engaging with some senior leaders, it does get a little bit, I would say, dicey at times because, I will push pretty hard. And I'll push pretty hard because it's something I truly believe in. So if you think about digital transformations, right? You Google it, right? Gartner is the most progressive, and Gartner believes, probably 25% actually deliver on the promise. I mean, that's 1 in 4, right? You know,
a lot of money down the tubes.
A lot of money down the tube. Absolutely. And what, you know, to me, part of that also comes down to the leadership. You know, do you have a traditional leader or a transformational leader, right? And I was sat across from a CEO, literally a CEO of a small bank. And he said, well, you know, we're going to hire this person, that person, and the other person. I said, but those are effectively more of the same. Yep. Now, you know, Einstein's definition of insanity is, you know, let's go do the same thing over and over again and hope we're going to get a different result. The key here is I asked a very pointed question. Why are you doing this? It says, we're doing this because we want to impact A, B, and C because our new users demand it. I said, great. So how do you define your new users? Oh, you know, millennials, et cetera, et cetera. I said, great. So next to this traditional CIO or CDO or whomever, do you have a digital native in that leadership position with that person? And it goes silent, right? I say, you've got a digital migrant. So if you've got a digital migrant, how does the digital migrant actually understand what the digital native actually needs? Yep. Right? So, you know, you've got to really start asking yourself, you know, is it time to freshen up the seats a little bit, to come with contrarian views, right? If not, guess what, right? Listen, you can keep going on and spending the money you want, but look at the replacement of the organizations in the S&P 500, etc., right? There are disruptors out there, and those disruptors out there because they're doing it something different. Yep. Right? And that's the key, right? Are you brave enough to look at your traditional CIO or a traditional leader and say, listen, we respect what you bring to the table. We're going to fight. You're going to have a Robin to you being the Batman, right? And this is how we're going to help you evolve around it because we've got to figure out how we get this stuff going.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting about that from a leadership standpoint, because I do think that fear factor, especially at the senior level, plays in because we're in this really weird stage right now in time where there's this shift in leadership, and there's a fair amount of people in seats, and I see it. You can almost just see it in the eyes where it's like, I'm not going anywhere. And if you try anything, and it's just it's a fear thing. It's well, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for me? And I love your analogy of, you know, we're going to find you a Robin to your Batman. Like, look, we're not saying you no longer add value or you don't matter. What we're saying is we fundamentally need to change the way we're thinking about things. And that means we need somebody who can think like that to sit alongside you. It's not saying there's no value to you. Let's oust you. Sometimes we need to, if you're that kind of leader that goes, yeah, well, nobody can tell me that my ideas aren't the best and I'm not, you know, I have to, well, okay, that's a different story. But the great leaders, it's like, hey, if you're in a senior seat and you aren't the most transformational person because this is new territory for you, that's fine. Just be willing to say, I need to bring that person along and I need to listen and I need to get a little bit uncomfortable with where the ship starts going and going. That's not how I would look at it, but maybe that's a good thing. Maybe that's a good thing. And okay, let's go.
No, absolutely. I think one of the biggest mistakes we made is we believe that one size does fit all, and it doesn't, right? No. And so we need to understand the different sizes, the different shapes, the different everything, and we need to be able to create a situation where as many scenarios as possible are taken into consideration. And obviously, this leads on to another theme within the book was around content, which I'm sure is a big thing in your world, right? And everyone says, well, I built the content, so we should be good. And I'm like, nah. I said, because what will happen is, right, there's going to be an evolution because different people are going to need help at different points in that journey, right? And
well, and baby users, even using that term, there's lots of different babies too. Like there's lots of different babies. There's not like, oh, the baby user and this is all of them and we've designed for the baby user. Oh,
no, absolutely.
All the baby users.
So when I've sat down in a room, you say, well, it's simple, Raj. We build some steps and we guide people through it. And I said, okay, Now let's play this scenario out. So you build all the steps, everybody's happy. Now what happens if someone's not playing the content and they need help at step 3? Are you able to trigger the content at that point? Oh, good idea. Good thought. I said, now you get to this point and someone's putting in a zip code, right? Don't you think we should probably put some data validation there? Because if they put 4 digits instead of 5 digits, you've got a compliance risk on your hands because payroll tax calculation is now out the window. And if you have a problem, it's a $6,000 fine. It's real, right? And they're like, oh, good idea. Now you've got someone at the end. Don't you think you should put up a little survey to say, hey, did you think that was any good? Yes or no? Because, you get some feedback immediately around user experience. Oh, yeah, fantastic. They said, oh, are we done now? I said, well, actually, no. Out of the 15 steps there, probably you could automate 5. You see how many scenarios we're talking about immediately there? Now, let's go one step further. You may have some of the more traditional users who are actually at that SharePoint site, at that wiki site that you built sort of like eons ago, who are reading up around the process, right? Oh yeah, someone actually found
those people exist.
Yes,
I know, and they exist. We joke about, but it's like they exist. They're there. They're doing it.
And then now you see that they're there. Wouldn't it be smart if you say, well, actually, if you're actually reading up on how to set a goal, why don't you just click on this button and we'll take you there and walk you through the process? Right. Yep. So now all of a sudden you have this omni-channel view of things. So your content has to be alive, has to be refreshed. Right. And there is no one size fits all. There's just a multitude of ways of thinking about it. And that's where, you come back to the whole analytics piece and the insights piece around it. And that's where it all comes together. I think that's really powerful. Really, really powerful.
I completely agree. And I think, the thing about it, and this is where the tech comes into play, is I'll be the first to say that if this is not your comfort zone, that can sound overwhelming. And I do think sometimes this is why people avoid it, because it's just almost, there's an anxiety factor that comes in where it's like, oh, the complexity that comes in. You know what? We'll make a job aid or an e-learning and we're going to send it out via the LMS. And then we can say we've trained everyone, like that person for you in your story where the button moved, where they go, yes, thank you for your inquiry. Please refer to the WebEx that we've recorded. And you know what? You didn't show up. Kind of not your problem. I understand where that person was because you were probably the 9,000th person that had called them that didn't attend anything and paid no attention to the emails and things like that. But instead of doing the thing that just disrupts workforce productivity by being like, go back and watch the hour-long WebEx recording that nobody's going to do. Although actually, no, we joke, somebody does. Somebody does. We know somebody does. But the point is, that's not a good strategy to deal with this complexity. And I think that's where, for me, I've always been so passionate about what digital adoption platforms can do, because you go, this can do it better. It can do it better versus being a caterpillar with less fur. You can't approach it like a butterfly. And I think a lot of orgs just don't, they see all the problems, they see the complexity, and they go, I just can't think of a world where we can do something with it. And I'm always like, but you can. That's the beauty of this. This is the beauty of tech. You can. I know you're sitting there going like, oh gosh, this is bad. Yeah, you're right. It is. It is bad. It is hard. It is complex. But guess what? It's a lot easier to solve for than you realize.
No, absolutely. And as you go on that journey, what typically then, starts to become very evident is, what are you trying to measure, right? And I talk about this this concept of, a lot of people talk about the, an act versus the impact, right? Yep. And I said, the act is we did something. The impact is, what did it do, right? I think what, and as you go through, you really do have to, as you're deploying the technology, you have to really start with the end user at the end of the journey and try and figure out what are we trying to solve. And now can we build content that basically tracks that entire user journey? And does it allow us to measure, right, at every step of the point, right, of that journey? And as you can do that, right, what that allows you now to do is say, hey, that content, actually the impact of that content has allowed the business. Absolutely. And then now you quantify that impact. some people say to me, Raj, you use this example of, putting some data validation around a zip code, right, in a HR system, for example. It's a simple thing as that. I said, do you understand how big an impact that can have? And people are like, and this was a true use case of when I was working with, initially with an insurer in the United States and then a retailer in Australia, right? It was quite interesting. I said, the Australian retailer, right, had employees in the US as well. And I said, what's your attrition like? They said, pretty crazy. And I said, well, just think about it for a moment, right? You've got 24 hours to get a completed paycheck or pay stub or whatever you want to call it in the US to the employee within 24 hours. And it has to be accurate. And if you can't get the zip code right, then your payroll tax calculation is wrong. The implication is it's not a mythical thing. It is a literal legislative $6,000 fine. Thank you very much. And now if you get 100 of those wrong, right? Do the math. It adds up.
Adds up, right? Very quickly.
It adds up. And that is the impact. That is the impact. Now, if you want to get a bit more flamboyant, if you're trying to hire someone, right, and time and you can reduce that time to fill by weeks, days, purely because you get a job rec out faster, because traditionally it takes 25-30 minutes to fill one of the damn things out. And now if you can squeeze that down to single digit minutes, right, you make it an easier process. That has real implications.
It does.
Right?
It has implications on employer brand. It has implications on even quality of candidates. Because again, really good candidates will be like, nah. Especially right now when the talent market's as hot as it is. If you're, asking people to fill out, 90 pages, I've seen it. The drop-off rate where people go, this looks like a good job. You know what? If this company's going to make me fill out this many form fields just to say I'm interested, forget it. And they'll literally walk right from it.
You're very kind because you've set me up quite nicely, because I've got a copy of the book here, right? And you've read the book and you've been kind enough to endorse the book. All right?
I have. It's a good book. It's a really good book. Especially for people who maybe conceptually kind of, I get it, but may only be thinking about this. And I had this conversation on a different show where if you think it's just like screen guidance, it's not. That's an important part, but that's not it. But go ahead.
So in the book, the first couple of pages, I actually lay out some predictions, right? And I'm bold enough or crazy enough to start at 2020 all the way out to 27. But the one that I personally love, and it probably was either I must have had one drink too many, a glass too many one evening, was I said in 2025, a digital adoption strategy becomes a core talent acquisition strategy. Right?
Yeah.
And what do I mean by that? I said digital employee experience becomes a top 5 question on a candidate's decision criteria on whether to join that organization. Companies that do not have a legitimate answer will not merely struggle with first-day churn of new hires, but will struggle to attract the right talent and skills, because people will simply not want to come to work and put up with the complexity, right? Yep. So to me, if someone's saying, hey, these guys are all getting excited around something that's a fad, it ain't going to be a fad. It is a reality. It is a reality. 4 million people or employees in the US, whether you want to call them, traditional employees or hourly wage workers, whatever, 4 million a month for, I'd say it's 10, 12 months now, almost in a row, basically saying, I'm not putting up with the complexity of work, whether it's from a tech perspective or other, I'm sure there are other reasons. And in spite of that, you've got 13 million jobs out there, right? The key at the end of the day, people are going to say, where can I be the best version of myself, right? Yeah. And, the first thing is, are these systems that they want me to use, are they going to drive me bananas, which, going to say, hey, no, I'm going to stay at home? Or are they actually going to help me be the best version of myself? And the organizations that crack that are the ones who are going to have such a wonderful talent attraction strategy, right? And people are going to start saying, hey, It might not be the best place on the planet, but guess what, right? I still am the best version of myself here.
Yeah. And I think this whole, so it's, to me, it's just hilarious that literally almost 2 years on the nose was our last conversation, because even in that conversation 2 years ago, we were saying these same things. It's not like we had a completely different point of view and then COVID hit and we went, whoops, we were way wrong. But like, let's quick to judge. No, it's just, to me, COVID and everything that happened exposed just how serious this is, and how organizations that kind of sloughed this off like, it's not really that big of a deal, it'll be fine. Suddenly they went, uh-oh. And they're still feeling the pain of that, because I can't tell you how many people I talk to who are saying they're losing workers. They don't even have jobs lined up. They're just like, you know what? I am done. I am done with this. I'm sick. I'm fed up. And COVID made it worse, because now they all got sent home. They like, some of the things that they enjoyed got taken away. They got thrown a whole bunch of new tech that didn't really work. I mean, it honestly, a lot of times it's like, it was a fine tech, but they're baby users, and they were told, you got to run a marathon. And it's like, I can't even roll over, and you're asking me to run a marathon, and your support is, well, I have a pair of running shoes and a bowl of spaghetti next to you, baby. Like, come on, like, go carb up and get on it. And it's like, that didn't work. And people have, in many ways, hit a wall where they've said, I'm just not. And I think the fact that this is going to be, and is today, a competitive advantage in the talent market, and from which really ultimately leads to your organizational success. This isn't just nice to have if we can figure it out. This is major.
No, you're absolutely right. I think one other thing that has really, put a spanner in the works was, we went through this whole agile phase. We're probably still in it, and people are still trying to figure it out. And I talk of it, the whole agile phase of almost being like the schoolyard pick for tribes. Oh, we'll have you, and we'll have you, and we'll have you. And then all of a sudden you're left with sort of like half a dozen that nobody ever wanted because they didn't really look very athletic or whatever it might be. And these people, you can call them Marge, for example, right, had been with the organization for 10, 15, 20, 25 years. A lot of knowledge there, a lot of corporate knowledge, right? And all of a sudden they said, hey, guess what? You're not needed anymore. Right. Yep. So all of a sudden they get jettisoned out of the organization. We clean everything up. The P&L looks fantastic because we've had cost takeout, because, and then all of a sudden, right, there comes a simple process that nobody knows how to use it. And someone sort of like in the back corner says, well, actually call Marge because she knows how to do it. And well, guess what? Marge is no longer with us.
Marge was a cost out opportunity.
Correct. And this might seem bad, but if you actually had leveraged, thought about your plan B, and if your plan B was a digital adoption platform, and you could have said to Marge, hey, Marge, you're not going anywhere. You may not be, first pick here, but you are going to be core to what we're going to build out, because that knowledge that you have, right? And then after, you decide to go into retirement, the good thing is we've retained that knowledge. Right. And now we have that ability to scale that knowledge outside of just Marge. Right. Yep. But unfortunately, we've been chasing, the P&L and this whole cost takeout without actually thinking about the problems, thinking about them through. Now, I know I generalize a little bit and it's unfair, but I think you see a lot of the traditional tribal knowledge disappear purely because we're trying to shift people or things into a model.
Yeah. Yep. I completely agree. And I think, we can, one of the things, and you would probably attest to this, it's easy to oversimplify some of it on either end and try and say, oh, well, it's this way or that way. It's not. And I think one of the things that I do my best to encourage leaders on is, it's like, this is hard work. Like even a DAP. It's not just this easy button. You slam the button and go, boom, like all our problems are fixed now, right? Like, no, that's going to lead you to be disappointed as well. but it's about the capability that you can build into the system that you fundamentally couldn't before, so that instead of thinking quarter to quarter, month to month, just how do we get to the end of the day, you can say, well, actually, no, we can think well beyond that and actually drive transformation in positive ways, rather than the digital fatigue we're creating now, where every year and a half we're rolling over these major systems and the workforce is just going like, they're calling uncle, going like, I can't deal with this. If you tell me we're changing our digital experience one more time, I'm just gonna implode. And I think it's and it's actually, what's interesting about that is, I think, I'm not one of the analysts, so I don't look at the data, but I would not be surprised, just based on some of the anecdotal conversations I would have, is that part of this great attrition that we're seeing is people are feeling so uncomfortable. They're like, you know what? If I've got to go through this anyway, I might as well go do it somewhere that's going to pay me more, or do something like I'm going to have to deal with this now. I might as well go do it somewhere else. And it's a lack of retention strategy, because it's like, well, we're putting them through the same thing we put new hires through. Why wouldn't people maybe go check out if the grass is greener somewhere else?
And this is where, I talk about the equity contract between employer and employee, right? And I think it's just got wider and wider, and COVID just kind of put a huge spotlight on it.
Just accelerated it.
Absolutely. And ultimately the question, that every employer has now to ask, right, says, why should that employee come to work every day, right? And I don't know if they are. Because the question is, because if you really did, then, you'd really be thinking, right, about how you can make life easier for the employee. So I think you've got a real, everything's been flipped on its head.
It has.
And the organizations that can pivot as quickly as possible or faster than the others are going to actually have that huge leg up in, I think, this year, next year is really about, mitigating cost. And so, let's hope people don't get too silly in terms of, we're going to, downsize certain parts, because guess what? Before you know it, you'll have all this one.
You're going to be hiring everybody back. You're going to want to, and they're not going to want to.
Well, yeah, boomerang employees and all that. But even if you want to hire them back, they're going to turn around. But what I said, 2025 is going to be a talent attraction strategy, right?
Yep.
Why? So, just extending it a little bit, you talked about, generalizing and trying to, not to make it too general. I've had people say to me, says, Raj, you make a lot of good points, but how do I start? Where do I start? Right. And so I created this cheat sheet for people. I don't charge for it. You just go to my dapstrategist.com website, fill in your fill in your credentials, and you get a copy of it. And it literally is an assessment sheet, right? And it says, okay, what are you trying to measure, right? What are the operational metrics? Great. Can you define, right, why the original business case, right? Who owns the implications of not hitting that business case, right? And it goes through all these things. And, I've had feedback saying, but I don't have, the vast majority of this. I said, that's great. Because you know why? You now know where you are before you actually go and sit down and ask people, right, for money to spend on this thing. Because once you fill it all out, right, you now have your true business case for change. And it's incredibly important. And it's not about pointing fingers at anybody.
No, it's not.
It's purely around saying, look, this is what we did. These were our intentions. We've got this hole here, right? We need to measure this, because if we don't, right, what are the implications? The implications, okay, people can say share price or whatever. No, the implications are we're going to lose good people. The implications are we're not going to have the positive impact that we had hoped for our employees. The implications are that those employees can't have a positive impact on their families because their bonus checks aren't as large as they should be, right? And so education, healthcare, housing,
everything
all gets implicated. And that has to be the core of why I come to work with you, for you, together with you, because I believe deep down, that technology can have that impact, right, on my social standing.
I agree.
Sorry, I got just, it really
no,
gets me
you know what?
up
What a great way to end it, honestly, because that at the core is why it matters. That's why it matters. And the reality is the possibilities there. So again, we could probably go on because I think there's so much to unpack still, but I genuinely appreciate you making the time, especially this time of night, for the follow-up. And I don't think this will be our last conversation as you continue down this path, because we've got a lot of the same ways of thinking about how this is. And I think there's a lot of opportunity in the workforce and in organizations to change the way they think about things. So thank you for making the time.
No, don't be silly. It's been an absolute pleasure. You've been a huge supporter. It's humbling to someone I've never met in person on the other side of the world who has literally taken, firsthand, input into what we do. Thank you very much for the platform. Thank you very much for the opportunity. It's been amazing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
No problem. Well, thanks everybody. Enjoy the rest of your week. And this is the first one on Tuesdays, so keep an eye out. The date has changed. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your week. And I'll still say have a great weekend, because why not? So talk to you all later.